The morning sun was just coming up when 14-year-old Daniel stepped through the tall iron gates of Westbrook Academy for the first time. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. He had dreamed about this moment for months, but now that it was here, he felt like running back home. Westbrook was not like any school he had ever seen. The buildings looked like castles from old movies. The grass was greener than anything in his neighborhood. Students walked around in crisp uniforms that probably cost more than his family spent on groceries in a month. Daniel looked down at his own uniform. It was second-hand, bought from a thrift store 3 towns over so nobody would recognize it. His mother had stayed up late fixing the loose buttons and adjusting the sleeves. She had done her best, but somehow it still looked different from what everyone else was wearing. He was here because of a scholarship. Full ride, they called it. It meant he did not have to pay a single dollar. His test scores had been the highest in the district, and when the letter came, his mother had cried for an hour straight. She kept saying that this was his ticket out. His chance to become something bigger than their small apartment, an empty refrigerator. What the letter did not mention was that a scholarship could open doors, but it could not make people accept you once you walked through them. Daniel found his locker on the 3rd floor of the main building. The hallways smelled like fresh paint and expensive perfume. Students moved in groups, laughing about summer trips to places Daniel had only seen in magazines. Someone mentioned a villa in Italy. Another talked about a new car they got for their birthday. A car. At 14, he kept his head down and tried to find his first class. The classroom was already half full when he walked in. He chose a seat in the back corner, hoping to blend into the walls. The teacher had not arrived yet, so students were talking loudly, showing off phones and watches and things Daniel did not even know the names of. A boy with perfectly styled hair and a confident smile sat down at the desk next to him. He looked Daniel up and down, like he was studying something under a microscope. "New scholarship, kid?" the boy asked. It was not really a question. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, I am Daniel. I am Theodore," the boy said. "But everyone calls me Theo. My family has been coming to this school for 4 generations. My grandfather donated the science building." Daniel did not know what to say to that. He just nodded again. Theo leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "So, what does your dad do?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the stomach. He had prepared for many things, but not this. Not so soon. "He works here," Daniel said quietly, hoping that would be enough. Theo raised an eyebrow. "Works here? Like a teacher?" Before Daniel could answer, the classroom door opened, and the teacher walked in. He had never been so grateful for a class to start in his entire life. But he knew the questions would come back. They always did. The truth was that Daniel's father, Raymond, had been working at Westbrook Academy for almost 12 years. He was not a teacher or an administrator or anything with a fancy title. He was the janitor. He mopped the floors, cleaned the bathrooms, fixed broken chairs, and made sure the buildings looked perfect for students who never even noticed he existed. Raymond always started his shift at 4 in the morning, long before any students arrived. He did this on purpose. He did not want Daniel to ever walk past him with a mop in his hand. He did not want his son to feel shame in front of these rich kids. Every night when Raymond came home, his knees aching and his hands rough from chemicals, he would sit across from Daniel at their tiny kitchen table and say the same thing. "This is all for you, son. Everything I do is so you can have a better life. You are going to be somebody. I know it." Daniel would nod and smile, but inside he carried a weight that his father could not see. He loved his dad more than anything in the world. Raymond was the strongest person he knew. But this school, these people, they had a way of making you feel small. They had a way of making you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. By the 3rd day, Daniel had learned to eat lunch behind the library where nobody could see him. He found a quiet bench near the old oak tree, and he would sit there with his sandwich, watching birds and trying not to think about the laughter coming from the cafeteria. It was on this 3rd day that everything changed. Theo had been watching him. Daniel did not know this, But Theo had been asking around, digging for information, trying to find out more about the quiet new kid who never talked about his family. And someone had finally told him the truth. Daniel was walking to his fifth period class when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw Theo with a group of 5 other boys, all of them grinning like they had just won a prize. "Hey, scholarship kid," Theo called out loudly. Daniel felt his blood go cold. "I do not know what you are talking about." Theo stepped closer, his smile growing wider. "Your dad is the janitor, the guy who cleans our toilets. I saw him this morning near the gym with his mop and bucket." The hallway went silent. Every single person was staring at Daniel now. He could feel their eyes on him like needles pressing into his skin. "Is that true?" Someone whispered. "The janitor's kid got into our school?" Another voice said. Then came the laughter. It started small, just a few chuckles. But then it grew and grew, until it felt like the whole hallway was laughing at him. Theo was laughing the loudest. His hand on his stomach like this was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Daniel stood there, frozen. He wanted to defend his father. He wanted to shout that Raymond was worth more than all of them put together. But the words would not come. His throat was tight, and his eyes were burning, and all he could do was stand there and take it. When the bell rang, the crowd slowly moved away. Theo patted Daniel on the shoulder as he passed. "Welcome to Westbrook, janitor's boy," he said. "Try not to get any dirt on us." That night, Daniel did not tell his father what happened. He sat at the kitchen table and smiled and nodded and pretended everything was fine. Raymond talked about his day, about a leaky pipe he fixed, and a teacher who thanked him for cleaning up a spill. "Good day at school?" Raymond asked. "Yeah, Dad." Daniel lied. "It was great." Later that night, when his father was asleep, Daniel sat in the corner of his small room and let the tears fall. He cried silently, his face buried in his pillow, wondering how he was going to survive 4 years in a place where he would never belong. But what Daniel did not know, what nobody at Westbrook Academy knew, was that he had a secret, a gift that had been growing inside him for years, waiting for the right moment to come out. And that moment was coming sooner than anyone could imagine. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Daniel's life. Word had spread through Westbrook Academy like wildfire. Everyone knew now. The scholarship kid was the janitor's son. The boy who cleaned their toilets had a child walking their hallways, sitting in their classrooms, breathing their air. Daniel learned to make himself invisible. He arrived at school early and left late, timing his movements to avoid the crowded hallways. He ate lunch alone every single day, sometimes behind the library, sometimes in an empty bathroom stall when the whispers got too loud. He never raised his hand in class, even when he knew the answers better than anyone else. The teachers noticed he was smart. His test scores were always near the top, but Daniel had figured out that being smart was not enough here. Being smart just made them hate him more. It reminded them that the janitor's son could outperform their private tutors and expensive prep courses. Theo made sure Daniel never forgot his place. The bullying was never physical. It was too clever for that. These were rich kids who knew how to hurt without leaving marks. One morning, Daniel opened his locker and found a mop inside. Someone had taken it from a supply closet and shoved it through the vents. A note was taped to the handle. It said, "Like father, like son." Another day, he sat down in chemistry class and noticed everyone staring at his chair. Someone had written, "Janitor's boy," on the seat with permanent marker. He had to sit on it for the whole period because there were no other chairs available. The teacher did not say anything. Maybe she did not notice. Maybe she did not care. The worst part was the silence. Not the laughing or the whispers, but the way people looked right through him like he was not even there. He would walk into a room, and conversations would stop. He would try to join a group project, and suddenly everyone already had partners. He was a ghost in a school full of people who wished he would just disappear. But Daniel never told his father. Every evening, Raymond would come home exhausted, his uniform stained with cleaning products, and his back bent from hours of scrubbing floors. He would sit at the kitchen table and ask about Daniel's day, and Daniel would smile and make up stories about friends he did not have and classes he pretended to enjoy. "I am so proud of you," Raymond would say, his tired eyes lighting up. "You are doing what I never could. You are going to graduate from that school and go to a great college and have a life I could only dream of." Daniel would nod and say thank you, and then go to his room and sit in the dark, wondering how much longer he could keep pretending. One night, about 2 months into the school year, Daniel could not sleep. It was past midnight, and the apartment was quiet. His father was snoring softly in the next room, exhausted from another long shift that started before the sun came up. Daniel walked into the small living room and stopped in front of the one thing in their apartment that did not look like it belonged there. It was an old upright piano, pushed against the wall between the window and the bookshelf. The wood was scratched and faded. Some of the keys were slightly yellow, but to Daniel, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Raymond had found this piano 10 years ago, thrown away behind a furniture store. The owner said it was broken and not worth fixing. But Raymond had spent 3 weekends taking it apart and putting it back together, watching tutorials and reading books from the library until every key worked again. He gave it to Daniel on his 5th birthday. "I cannot afford lessons," Raymond had said, kneeling down to look his son in the eyes. And that is exactly what Daniel did. For the past 9 years, he had taught himself piano using free videos on the internet and books borrowed from the public library. He practiced every night after his father went to sleep, keeping the volume low so he would not wake him. He learned scales and chords and songs that most people needed expensive teachers to master. Music became his escape. When the world was cruel and the days were hard, he could sit at that piano and disappear into a place where none of it mattered. The notes did not care that his clothes were secondhand. The melodies did not judge him for his father's job. When his fingers touched those keys, he was not the janitor's son. He was just a boy, making something beautiful out of nothing. Tonight, Daniel sat down at the piano and let his hands rest on the keys. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he began to play. The piece was Chopin's Ballade, No. 1, in G minor. It was one of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano. Professional musicians spent years perfecting it. Daniel had learned it from a grainy video filmed in a concert hall somewhere in Europe. He had watched that video hundreds of times, pausing and rewinding, studying every finger movement until he could play it from memory. The music filled the small apartment. It started soft and gentle, like a whisper, then built into something powerful and overwhelming. Daniel's fingers moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who had never had a single lesson. The notes poured out of him like water breaking through a dam, carrying all the pain and loneliness and anger he had been holding inside. He played for almost 15 minutes without stopping. When the final note faded into silence, he sat there with his eyes still closed, breathing heavily, feeling lighter than he had in months. He did not know that his father was standing in the doorway, watching him with tears running down his face. Raymond had heard the music from his bedroom. At first, he thought it was a recording, some concert playing on the radio. But then he realized it was coming from the living room. He had walked out quietly and stood there in the dark, watching his son create something so beautiful it made his heart ache. When Daniel finally opened his eyes and turned around, he saw his father standing there crying. "Dad," Daniel said, startled. "I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you." Raymond walked over slowly and sat down next to his son on the small piano bench. For a long moment, he did not say anything. He just looked at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. "How long have you been able to play like that?" Raymond asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shrugged. "I do not know. A few years, maybe." Raymond shook his head in disbelief. "That was not just playing, son. That was something else. That was a gift." Daniel looked down at the keys. "It is just something I do to relax. It is not a big deal." Raymond put his hand on Daniel's shoulder and gently turned him so they were facing each other. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I have cleaned floors and scrubbed toilets for 12 years, so you could have a chance at something better. I always believed you were special. But tonight, I realized I did not even know how special." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Promise me something. Promise me you will not hide this. The world needs to hear what you can do. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded slowly, not sure what to say. He had no idea that in just a few weeks, the entire world would hear him play, and nothing would ever be the same again. Spring arrived at Westbrook Academy with blooming flowers and a buzz of excitement that Daniel did not understand at first. Students were talking in groups, teachers were busy with preparations, and the main auditorium was being decorated like it was getting ready for a royal visit. Then Daniel saw the banners hanging in the hallways. The annual talent showcase was coming. It was the biggest event of the school year, a night when students performed in front of parents, wealthy donors, and important alumni. Everyone who mattered in the city would be there, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to be impressed. Daniel had heard about this event before. It was legendary at Westbrook. Students spent months preparing their performances. Some flew in private coaches from other cities. Others rented instruments that cost more than houses. This was not just a talent show. It was a display of wealth and status wrapped in the disguise of art. But this year, there was something even more special. The school had received a gift that everyone was talking about. A brand new Steinway grand piano, worth over $200,000, donated by one of the wealthiest families connected to the academy. The piano was black and shining, and absolutely perfect. It sat on the auditorium stage like a throne, waiting for its king. And everyone knew who that king was supposed to be. Theo had been taking piano lessons since he was 4 years old. His family had spent a fortune on the best teachers money could buy. He was scheduled to perform the closing piece at the showcase, playing on the very piano his family had donated. It was supposed to be his moment of glory, the night when everyone would applaud and his parents would beam with pride. Daniel watched all of this from a distance, saying nothing. He went to his classes, ate lunch alone, and tried not to think about the beautiful instruments sitting under the stage lights. Sometimes, late in the evening when the school was empty, he would walk past the auditorium and peek through the doors just to look at it. He had never seen a piano so magnificent. His fingers ached to touch those keys, to hear what sounds could come from something so perfectly made. But that was just a dream. Pianos like that were not meant for boys like him. 2 weeks before the showcase, something unexpected happened. Daniel was sitting behind the library during lunch when he heard a group of students talking loudly nearby. He was not trying to listen, but their voices carried in the wind. "Did you hear about Theo?" one of them said. "Yeah, he hurt his wrist playing tennis yesterday. Pretty bad, I guess." "What about the showcase? He was supposed to play the closing piece." "I do not know. I heard they are looking for a replacement, but nobody else can play at his level." Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. He stayed very still, afraid that even breathing too loudly would somehow draw attention to him. Then the students walked away, and he was alone again with his thoughts. That same afternoon, the music director made an announcement. Her name was Mrs. Porter, a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes who had been teaching at Westbrook for over 30 years. She stood in front of the assembly hall and explained that due to an unfortunate injury, they needed a new pianist for the showcase closing performance. "If anyone can play classical piano at an advanced level, please come see me after school," she said. "This is an important opportunity." An evento. Nobody volunteered. Classical piano was rare, even among these privileged students. Most of them played guitar, or sang, or danced. The few who played piano were not skilled enough for a closing performance at such a prestigious event. Days passed and Mrs. Porter grew more worried. The showcase was approaching fast, and she still had no one. The principal was pressuring her. The donors were expecting a grand finale. Everything was falling apart. One evening, Raymond came home from work with a strange look on his face. "Something interesting happened today," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. Daniel looked up from his homework. "What?" "I was mopping the auditorium floor after everyone left, and I got to thinking about that big fancy piano sitting up there on stage." Raymond paused and smiled. "So I told you to stop hiding your gift, right? Well, maybe it is time to stop hiding." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Dad, what did you do?" "I did not do anything yet, but I am going to talk to someone tomorrow. That music teacher, the nice one with the gray hair. I am going to tell her about you." "No," Daniel said quickly. "Why not?" "Because they will laugh at me. They already think I do not belong here. If I try to perform at their fancy showcase, they will just find another way to make fun of me." We. Raymond leaned forward and looked at his son with serious eyes. "Listen to me. I have watched you play that old piano in our living room. I have heard what you can do. Those rich kids with their expensive lessons cannot touch what you have. This is your chance to show them who you really are." Daniel shook his head. "You do not understand what it is like there." "Dad, maybe I do not," Raymond admitted. "But I understand one thing. You cannot spend your whole life being invisible because you are afraid of what people might say. At some point, you have to stand up and let them see you." The next day, Raymond did exactly what he said he would do. He found Mrs. Porter during his break and told her about his son. She listened politely, but Daniel could imagine what she was thinking. The janitor's son? Playing classical piano? It sounded like a joke, but Mrs. Porter was not like the others. She had been teaching music for too long to judge talent by last names and bank accounts. She asked Raymond if Daniel could come to the auditorium after school for an audition. That afternoon, Daniel stood backstage, his hands trembling. Mrs. Porter was sitting in the front row, waiting patiently. The auditorium was empty except for the two of them. The giant Steinway piano gleamed under the lights, looking even more beautiful up close. "Take your time," Mrs. Porter said gently. "Play whatever you feel comfortable with." Daniel walked slowly to the piano. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. They felt smooth and cool. Nothing like the rough old keys on his piano at home. For a moment, he just sat there, afraid to make a sound. Then he thought about his father. He thought about all those early mornings and late nights. He thought about the 12 years of mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms so that his son could have a chance. Daniel closed his eyes and began to play. He chose the same piece he had played that night in the living room. Chopin's Ballade. Number 1. The notes came out slowly at first, hesitant and careful. But then, something changed. The music took over, and Daniel forgot where he was. He forgot about the fancy school, and the mean students, and the weight of being different. He just played. When he finished, the auditorium was silent. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at Mrs. Porter. She was sitting very still, her hand covering her mouth. There were tears running down her cheeks. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Porter stood up slowly and walked toward the stage. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I taught myself," Daniel said quietly. Mrs. Porter stared at him in disbelief. Then she did something Daniel did not expect. She started to laugh. Not a mocking laugh, but a laugh of pure joy and amazement. "You just changed everything," she said. "You are playing at the showcase. I do not care what anyone says." Daniel wanted to argue, to explain why this was a terrible idea. But looking at Mrs. Porter's face, he knew there was no turning back now. In exactly 12 days, he would walk onto that stage in front of hundreds of people who thought he was worthless. And he would show them all what the janitor's son could really do. The night of the showcase arrived faster than Daniel was ready for. He stood backstage in a small dressing room, staring at himself in the mirror. His hands would not stop shaking. His stomach felt like it was filled with rocks. He was wearing his father's only dress shirt, It was white with thin blue stripes, slightly too big in the shoulders, and patched at the elbows where the fabric had worn thin over the years. His mother had bought it for Raymond 15 years ago, back when they still believed life would get easier. It was the nicest piece of clothing anyone in their family owned. Raymond had pressed it that morning with extra care. He handed it to Daniel with a proud smile and said, "You wear this tonight. It is not fancy like what those other kids have, but it is clean, and it is ours." Daniel could hear the noise coming from the auditorium. 300 guests had gathered for the biggest night of the school year. They were wealthy donors, successful alumni, proud parents in designer gowns and expensive suits. The air smelled like perfume and money. Laughter echoed through the walls. The kind of easy laughter that comes from people who have never worried about paying rent. The showcase had been going on for almost 2 hours. Students had performed one after another. A girl sang an opera piece in Italian. A boy played violin, with an instrument that cost more than a small house. 2 sisters performed a dance they had learned from a choreographer flown in from New York City. Everything was polished and perfect, and exactly what everyone expected. Now there was only one performance left, the closing act. The moment everyone had been waiting for. Mrs. Porter found Daniel backstage. She could see the fear in his eyes. She put her hand gently on his shoulder and leaned in close. "I know you are scared," she said softly, "but I need you to listen to me. What you have inside you is real. It is rare. Those people out there have spent their whole lives surrounded by money and privilege. But most of them have never heard anything like what you can do. Tonight, you are going to give them a gift they do not even know they need." Daniel swallowed hard. "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up," Mrs. Porter said simply. "And the world keeps spinning. But I do not think you will. I think you are going to walk out there and remind everyone why music matters." She squeezed his shoulder one more time and then walked away to take her seat. Daniel peeked through the curtain at the audience. The first few rows were filled with the most important guests. He recognized some of the parents from school events. They sat with straight backs and judging eyes, waiting to be impressed. And there, right in the front row, sat Theo. His wrist was wrapped in a bandage and resting in a sling. He was wearing a suit that probably cost thousands of dollars, and he was smiling. But it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a person wears when they are waiting for something bad to happen to someone else. Theo had heard about the replacement pianist. He knew it was Daniel. And he had told everyone who would listen that the janitor's son was about to embarrass himself in front of the entire school. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He wanted to run. He wanted to disappear through the back door and never come back. He could go home right now, and nobody would even notice. He was just the invisible boy, the scholarship kid, the one who did not belong. Then he looked toward the back of the auditorium. There, standing against the wall near the exit doors, was his father. Raymond was still wearing his work uniform. He had not had time to change after his shift. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was a faint stain on his sleeve from cleaning supplies. He looked so out of place among all these wealthy people in their expensive outfits. But he was there. He had come to watch his son. Raymond saw Daniel looking at him through the curtain. He could not wave because his hands were gripping his mop handle like it was the only thing keeping him standing. But he nodded. Just once. A small, simple nod that said everything words could not. "I believe in you. I am proud of you. Show them who you are." The principal walked onto the stage and approached the microphone. The auditorium fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this wonderful evening of talent and celebration. We have one final performance tonight. A piano piece that I am told will be quite special." He paused and looked down at his notes. "Please welcome to the stage, Daniel Williams." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the whispers started. "Williams? Is that not the name of the janitor? Wait, the janitor's son is performing? Is this some kind of joke?" Daniel heard every word. He felt every stare. His legs did not want to move. But then he thought about his father standing in the back, holding that mop, wearing his stained uniform in a room full of people who thought they were better than him. And suddenly Daniel was not afraid anymore. He was angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you want to fight. The kind that makes you want to prove something. He walked onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding. The auditorium looked even bigger from up here. 300 faces stared at him. Most of them confused. Some of them amused. Theo was grinning widely now, already preparing his jokes for tomorrow. Daniel sat down at the Steinway piano. The bench was smooth and perfectly positioned. The keys gleamed under the lights. Black and white and waiting. He placed his fingers gently on the surface and took a deep breath. The room was completely silent. Everyone was waiting. Some were waiting for music. Others were waiting for failure. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about his tiny apartment. He thought about the old piano his father had rescued from the garbage and spent weeks repairing. He thought about all those nights practicing alone while the world slept, teaching himself note by note, measure by measure, until his fingers bled and healed and bled again. Then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated through the auditorium like a gentle breeze. Soft, careful, almost hesitant. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, not sure what to expect. But then the music began to build. Daniel's fingers moved faster, pressing deeper, pulling sounds from the piano that seemed impossible. The melody grew stronger, more confident, filling every corner of the massive room. It was beautiful, and sad, and powerful, all at the same time. Daniel was not thinking anymore. He was not in the auditorium, surrounded by people who looked down on him. He was somewhere else entirely. A place where nothing existed except the music. Every note carried a piece of his story. The loneliness of eating lunch alone. The pain of being called names. The love of a father who gave everything so his son could have a chance. The music swelled and crashed like waves against rocks. It whispered and roared. It made people feel things they did not expect to feel. In the audience, a woman wiped tears from her eyes. A man who had not cried in 20 years felt his throat tighten. And in the back of the room, Raymond stood perfectly still, tears streaming down his face, watching his son become something extraordinary. The final notes rang out, hanging in the air for what felt like forever. Then, there was silence. Complete and absolute silence. Daniel opened his eyes. His heart was pounding. He did not know if he had done well or made a terrible mistake. Then his father started to clap. Alone at first, the sound echoing in the quiet auditorium. One person, clapping for his son. Then Mrs. Porter stood up and joined him. Then another person, and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. 300 people, wealthy and powerful, and dressed in their finest, giving a standing ovation to the janitor's son in his father's old shirt. Theo sat frozen in his seat, unable to move, unable to clap, unable to understand what had just happened. Daniel looked at the crowd, then at his father in the back, still clapping with tears on his face. And for the first time since he walked through those iron gates, Daniel felt like he truly belonged. The morning after the showcase, Daniel woke up to something strange. His phone would not stop buzzing. He had 17 missed calls and over 200 messages from numbers he did not recognize. At first, he thought something was wrong. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone was trying to reach his father. Then he opened his social media and understood. Someone in the audience had recorded his entire performance. The video had been uploaded late last night, with a simple caption that read, "Janitor's son stuns elite prep school with breathtaking piano performance." By sunrise, it had been shared over 50,000 times. By noon, it had crossed 1 million views. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone in disbelief. Comments were pouring in from all over the world. People from countries he had never heard of were writing messages in languages he could not read. Musicians, teachers, journalists, and ordinary people were all saying the same thing. They were amazed. They were moved. They wanted to know who this boy was and where he had learned to play like that. The story spread faster than Daniel could process. News outlets picked it up within hours. Headlines appeared on websites and television screens across the country. Self-taught piano prodigy silences critics at elite academy. The janitor's son, who played his way into history. Every article told the same story, the story of a boy who had nothing but talent and a father who had everything but money. By the end of the week, Daniel had received scholarship offers from 3 of the most prestigious music schools in the world: Juilliard in New York, Berkeley in Boston, the Royal Academy of Music in London. Each letter promised a full ride, covering tuition, housing, and living expenses. They wanted him. They were competing for him. The boy who used to eat lunch alone behind the library was suddenly the most wanted student in the country. But the biggest changes happened closer to home, inside the walls of Westbrook Academy. Students who had never spoken to Daniel before suddenly wanted to be his friend. They smiled at him in the hallways. They saved seats for him in the cafeteria. They invited him to parties and study groups and weekend trips. Everyone wanted to be close to the boy who had gone viral. The boy who had made their school famous. Daniel accepted their kindness, but he did not forget. He remembered every whisper, every cruel joke, every time they had made him feel like he did not belong. He knew that many of these people were only being nice because he had proven himself worthy in their eyes. If he had failed on that stage, they would still be calling him the janitor's boy. Teachers who had overlooked him now praised his potential. The principal, who had once questioned whether a staff child should perform at the showcase, now invited Daniel to special events and introduced him to important guests. Everyone wanted a piece of his success. And Theo? He transferred to another school before the semester ended. His family quietly arranged it. Omerly 4. Arlie for C, saying they wanted a fresh start somewhere new. But everyone knew the real reason. Theo could not handle being at a school where the boy he had bullied was now more celebrated than he ever was. Daniel did not feel happy about Theo leaving. He did not feel anything at all. Revenge had never been his goal. He just wanted to be seen for who he really was. The months that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, performances, and decisions. Daniel played at charity events and school concerts. He was featured in magazines and invited to talk shows. People kept asking him the same question over and over again. How did you learn to play like that, without any formal training? His answer was always the same. I had a piano that my father fixed with his own hands. I had free videos on the internet and books from the library. And I had a lot of nights when playing music was the only thing that made me feel okay. It was a simple answer, but it resonated with millions of people. Daniel became a symbol of something bigger than himself. He represented every kid who had ever been told they were not good enough. Every family that had struggled to make ends meet. Every dreamer who had been laughed at for daring to want more. Graduation day arrived on a warm afternoon in late May. The sun was shining, and the campus looked more beautiful than ever. Flowers bloomed along the pathways. Families gathered on the lawn in their nicest clothes. It was a day of celebration, of endings and new beginnings. Daniel had been asked to give a speech. At first, he wanted to say no. Public speaking terrified him, almost as much as that first day at Westbrook. But then he thought about all the kids out there who might be watching, kids like him who felt invisible and alone. Maybe his words could help them the way music had helped him. He stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back at him. Students in caps and gowns, parents with cameras, teachers who had watched him grow from a scared freshman into something they never expected. And there, standing at the very back just like the night of the showcase, was his father. Raymond was not in his work uniform today. He was wearing a new suit that Daniel had bought for him with money from his first paid performance. It was simple and dark blue, and it fit perfectly. Raymond looked uncomfortable in it, like he was not used to wearing anything so nice. But he was smiling, and that was all that mattered. Daniel took a deep breath and began to speak. 4 years ago, I walked through the gates of this school with a second-hand backpack and a heart full of fear. I did not have the right clothes, or the right connections, or the right last name. I was just a kid whose father worked as a janitor, trying not to be noticed. He paused and let the words settle over the crowd. For a long time, I believed that my worth was determined by what I did not have. I thought that being poor meant being less. I thought that coming from nothing meant I would always be nothing. And there were people here who made sure I believed that every single day. A few heads turned. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But I learned something important. Talent does not care about your bank account. Character does not come from your family name. And real worth, the kind that actually matters, is not something you can buy or inherit. It is something you build. One choice at a time. One hard day at a time. Daniel looked directly at his father. For 12 years, my dad cleaned these floors so I could walk on them. He woke up before sunrise, so I would never have to see him working in front of my classmates. He sacrificed everything so I could have a chance at something better. And I spent too long being ashamed of that, instead of being proud. His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. So if there is one thing I want to say today, it is this. Never be ashamed of where you come from. Never let anyone make you feel small because of who your parents are or what they do for a living. The people who lift you up when you have nothing are worth more than all the money in the world. When he finished, Raymond was crying openly, not trying to hide it anymore. The applause that followed was louder than anything Daniel had ever heard. That fall, Daniel enrolled at Juilliard on a full scholarship. Before he left, he gave his father an envelope. Inside was a check from his first major performance, enough to cover 6 months of rent and bills. There was also a handwritten note. You gave me everything. Now it is my turn. No more mopping floors, Dad. I have got us from here. Raymond framed that note and hung it on the wall next to a photograph of Daniel sitting at the Steinway piano on the night everything changed. And sometimes, late in the evening, he would stand in front of that photo and remember the boy who taught himself to play on a broken piano, rescued from the garbage. The boy who turned pain into music, and music into a future nobody saw coming. His son, the janitor's son. The one who changed everything. Mar.